Good afternoon or morning. I'm going to talk today about fire and fuels and forests. So I'm not going to talk much about shrublands and stuff, but certainly about forest ecosystems. And one thing I wanted to come up right up, the ideas of regimes, and we heard this from several people. Fire regimes are critical. Some forests are adapted to high severity, infrequent fire. Others are adapted to very frequent fire that have very different characteristics. So when you think about a crown fire ecosystem, are you going to go in there and prescribe burn it? Are you going to thin it? Are you going to do these other things? You might do that locally for infrastructure purposes, but it's outside the ecology of the system. Here's a great example of what happens to crown fire systems when they burn too frequently. This is in Northern Territories, Canada. This is Mark Parisian's work up in this area of Wood Buffalo National Park, and what we have is jack pine here. Jack pine's a serotinous species, closed cone. Burns generally infrequently, every 70 to 150 years or so. But here you got a place that burned in 2004 and then reburned in 2014. You maybe can see those skeletons of the jack pine there in the foreground. We put a transect in there as part of the research project. We found one seedling in an area of almost 50 square meters. So here you see essentially a place where fire regimes are changing abruptly because of climate warming, and we're seeing major changes in vegetation. Major. Here's a different place. This is the Sierra Nevada. So we're hopping over in California. Here we got some historical data from 1911 that I actually collected with some colleagues. And you see the numbers in the brackets are English. Outside that are actually the metric units. 1911, when you look at the number of trees per acre in this site, amazingly, about 20 trees per acre in 1911. You look at that now in 2013, you got 224 trees per acre. This is actually, on that lower right picture, is the picture of the site today, before the rim fire burned it up, actually, unfortunately. So the picture on the lower left is the Sierra San Pedro de Martir in actually northern Baja, Mexico, Mediterranean ecosystem, that part of Mexico. You look at the densities of the Sierra San Pedro Martir today, Jeffrey pine mixed conifer, it's actually very similar to the 1911 data we have for California. I would never use that 1911 data as a target point, but I think it helps us understand maybe the idea of resilient systems. What about work that's gone on in California, other places in the country? The Southeast basically continues to really be the leader in the United States of America. They burn 75% of the system area per year. They basically do great work culturally. It's something that's accepted, and I have to give them great kudos. And I hope they can keep their program going, because it's getting more complicated. People moving in without having fire cultural values from the Northeast, smoke management, all sorts of things. Down below, you can see some of the early forest researchers that worked on fire. Many of them are listed. I'm going to spend a moment on Weaver, Harold Weaver from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Weaver did some remarkable things. He burned almost 690,000 acres from 1945 to 1955 in eastern Washington as part of a management. And then he wrote a paper that actually said that 87% reduction of damage from his system, and he actually reduced cost of control by 54%. Then there's a quote, "This is not a presentation of management system, this is not just prescribed burning. It's basically a way you could manage land." So in some ways, you look at what Weaver accomplished with very small crews many decades ago, and you got to think, wow, this is something that could happen. When Weaver retired, the program essentially shut down. Big problem with institutional support. San Carlos Apache Reservation is beginning to do some very creative things down in this part of the world today, and they do have institutional support, and they're managing fires with some real interesting ways that really get some outcomes. I have to give them some strong kudos. Some research that maybe connects more fire suppression strategies, ecological outcomes, maybe something dynamic there that could help us understand how to manage fire better today. What do common fuel treatments look like? Had to show this at least to the audience. Here we see a picture in the first upper left, big sugar pine, and then upper right is after prescribed fire, Blodgett Forest in the Sierra Nevada. Down below we have a mechanical plus fire unit pre on the left, and then after we have a fire and mechanical thinning in the right in 2003. Now the next picture, the right ones are going to change to go 2008. And lo and behold, you see a shrub response down there, you see the understory change, and then the last picture is going to be in 2016, where the shrubs are essentially getting larger again. We're going to burn that unit in the upper right for the third time this fall. So essentially what this tells us is this is a conversation with the land that goes on forever. You know, this idea that you're going to do prescribed burning management, it's something that's going to go on in eternity. You can't just somehow think you've got it done. Fuel treatments show that we can reduce ladder fuels and surface fuels, we can get the job done. There's no doubt from research that shows that. And we can also know from research that you have very few unintended negative ecological consequences from these fuel treatments. A fire and fire surrogate study funded by the Joint Fire Sciences Program showed that. Longevity of treatments, I put there 5 to 25 years, 20 years or so. It's going to vary based on your system. So again, that conversation if you're going to have to do this forever. And some places you can actually manage lightning fire, like in Region 3 of the Forest Service, to make these goals. We know from empirical research that once you hit these treated areas that wildfires change. So we do have really good empirical evidence. If you do these treatments effectively, you can do it. But we also know, just like the Forest Service chief said, the scale of treatments are inadequate. What about lightning fire? The other thing you could do. This is Yosemite National Park. We're going to look at a place that basically has been burning for about 40 years. Lightning strikes. Over in the right pictures are actually places that have burned, and there's a diagram of different perimeters of fire. We've done some research. Brandon Collins did it. Shows that if a fire intersects an area that had burned 9 years previously or earlier, then in 90% of the case, it went out on its own. So it's an amazing dynamic of fire on land. Here's a picture of it, one of the places that burned. You see a lot of dead trees. You go in this place today, I think it's magnificent. I've taken a lot of people in this place over the years. They think it's too abrupt, too much death, too many dead trees, too many openings. But turns out, that's what fire's doing. Here's a picture that shows maybe an analysis of this site. In 1970, you see the dark green, that's what it was. And actually, the Park Service was just as good at putting out fires as the Forest Service. The earliest fire we have record of in that area was 1874. So it was out for suppression for 100 years. Fire comes back. You see the right picture, 200% increase in wet meadows, 200% increase in dry meadows, shrublands up, and then the forest down by 22%. And lo and behold, we see stream water actually leaving this basin being stable or higher. And we have actually, that paper listed there shows that there were 3 control areas that had no fire regime, pure suppression. All 3 of those areas had significant decreases of water out of the system since 1974. So there's all ties here to maybe vegetation, fire, water, but things that are very interesting. My last slide here. So frequent fire forests have changed. They've changed big time. The western U.S. has got real issues. Climate change is a piece of this. I absolutely agree. But the frequent fire systems, we have the option to do some sort of treatment, some sort of managed wildfire to actually reduce the stress, reduce the ability of these trees to die at scale, increase resilience, adaptation. All that can happen. Crown fire systems, we've got real issues. These have much less management options. You're not going to prescribe burn them. Maybe colleagues in Australia, in the alpine ash communities, Victoria, they're doing aerial reseeding because the fires are happening too fast. Are you going to bring back some of those species by aerial seeding? Are you not? Are you just going to let them go to a different trajectory? Those are big questions, very difficult. So I had a paper I wrote here with several colleagues in 2016 about ideas. We need a budget that's outside of suppression, longer employment for seasonal workers so we can get more fire on the ground, strategies for more lightning fire use throughout the country, and I think to make forest resilience a standalone top land management priority for the United States of America. We got the Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, Clean Air Act. We have not got a Forest Resiliency or Forest Act. So I think if you look at that carefully, Eric Biber is actually one of the co-authors of that paper. He's a UC Berkeley law professor. These other acts have got a lot of teeth. The other acts really have the ability to shape policy. I think we need an act for the forest. The next 1 to 2, 3 decades is critical. I think this is the time we have to maybe change a trajectory somewhat. We're not going to touch every hectare or acre, but we can actually make a difference if we wanted to. Forest Service has got an opportunity, Park Service as well. And I think this is a legacy piece. The legacy is, what are we going to leave to our next generations? There'll be another conference probably right here in 50 years. We're talking about fire and what's going on. I just hope the things we do here today and the things we do into the near future set up the next generation to be able to make decisions that actually work for them versus looking back and them saying, 2017, well, those people really screwed up. You know, they had this idea to maybe do some work, do some things that were creative, but they just somehow never got it done. I hope that's not our legacy.